Hello and welcome to this tutorial. My name is Ghouse and today we are going to learn about the servlet lifecycle. In this demo, we are going to understand the life cycle of a servlet, and what are the different lifecycle phases of a servlet, and learn to use the lifecycle methods of a servlet. Finally, we are also going to understand how the servlet can be loaded when the web application is deployed. We'll be creating a servlet named test servlet and understand how the container processes the request. We'll also try to override some of the lifecycle methods like init and destroy in this particular demonstration, and we'll see how the container executes these methods. As you can look at the diagram, when a request is initiated from the browser by typing the URL, you see that the browser sends the request to the container. And at this point of time, what does the container do? The container first creates two objects. As you can see on the screen, there are the request object and the response object. Now the container has to decide where this request has to be sent to. There are multiple applications that you can see on the screen. This is the first web app, a couple of web applications on there, right? So where is that this browser or this container has to forward this request to? Now this container goes and refers to the web.xml, or we call it as a deployment descriptor. Or it also processes the annotations and sees where this request has to go to, right? And it finds out the URLs from the web.xml. It maps the URL of the request to the servlet, which is catering to that particular request. Once it finds the appropriate servlet, the container passes the request and response objects to that particular servlet. Now the servlet processes the response, and once the servlet has processed the response, it sends this response back to the browser. Now this is the way how the container processes the requests. Now we'll understand what are the different lifecycle phases that this servlet goes through. Right? As soon as a request comes for the first time to a servlet, there is a method inside the servlet called as init method. But before the init method is executed, the container creates an object of the test servlet, instantiates it, and then calls a method called as init method. Now once this init method is executed, the servlet executes the next method, which is called as service method. And the service method is executed repeatedly for multiple requests that the servlet receives. And as you can see in the screen, the init method is executed only once, whereas the service method will be executed for every request that the container gets. For the subsequent request that the container gets, the container does not again initialize or load that servlet. Instead, it directly executes the service method. Right? So these are the different life cycles of a servlet. First, the servlet is instantiated. Next, for the first time when the servlet receives a request, the init method is executed, and the service method is repeatedly executed for every request that the web application gets. Finally, when there are no more requests and time has been passed out, or when there is no more memory, the container decides to destroy that particular servlet. So these are the different lifecycle methods that you see in the servlet lifecycle. The service method in turn calls the doGet method and the doPost method based on what is the method type that it is getting in the request. Now, where are these methods coming from? As you can see in the diagram, there are three classes. A generic servlet is the superclass which contains this method init, service, and destroy. And the HTTP servlet extends this generic servlet. The init method, service method, and destroy method are inherited by HTTP servlet through the generic servlet. The servlet which we are creating, that is the test servlet, extends the HTTP servlet and inherits all those methods. Now, in case you need to override or you want to do anything during the initialization of the servlet, you can override this init method and write the code whatever you want to write to. Right? Finally, whenever there are no more requests to the servlet, or the container has no memory to accommodate that particular servlet instance, it goes and executes the destroy method. So if you want to deallocate any resources or deallocate memory for whatever you have assigned in that particular servlet, you can go ahead and do that in the destroy method. Now let's go ahead and see the demonstration of how you override this init method and destroy method.